Hello and welcome to Africa Here and Now, the conversation you've always wanted to have about the continent. I'm Martine Dennis. Today, we start our second series with the most listened to French-speaking singer in the world who's been targeted by a virulent racist campaign. What have the French got against pop superstar Aya Nakamura? And despite all the negativity in Europe about immigration, we hear how people in the African diaspora, like Aya Nakamura, are growing in stature and clout. And why was a well-known Nigerian transvestite sent to jail just for doing what so many others do? The curious case of Bobrisky and that peculiar Nigerian custom of spraying. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce to you again Patrick Smith, editor of Africa Confidential, otherwise known as Wikipedia. Patrick's in Accra. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Martine. Hi, all the listeners out there, the billions of you. Welcome again. Akwaba, as they say in Accra.
And the one and only Donu Kogbara, journalist, political commentator, and now host of her own YouTube channel called Donu's World. Donu's in Abuja. Hi there, Donu.
Hi.
But first, Aya Nakamura, the most listened to Francophone artist in the world. She's young, in her 20s, and black. Her family's from Mali, and she's been subjected to vile streams of racist abuse since it was rumoured that she'd been invited to perform at the Olympic opening ceremony in Paris in July. Well, let's ask Rabi Yasane, art curator and filmmaker who's in Paris, more about this. Rabi, welcome to Africa Here and Now. Now, Aya's detractors are going so far as to question her Frenchness. I mean, what have they got against her?
Well, she's black. She's black. I think that's the main topic about, this kind of a crazy rage against her. But it's not something that is necessarily, that does necessarily reflect how the general population feels about it. We don't have the polls to speak about that, but I just wanted to say that. But the whole thing started with a small group of right-wing extremists called Natif. I think Natif means native. So, I mean, it's clear, what they want to promote.
Right. But they had a really, really hurtful banner unfurled on the banks of the Seine, didn't they?
Exactly.
Tell us what it said.
Yeah, so it was a small group, and the banner said, non, y a pas moyen, that it's, repeating the lyrics of Aya Nakamura that says, actually, when it translated, no, it's not possible. So they say, no, not possible, go back to Bamako. Here is France, go back to Bamako. Yeah, so it was in substance what they were saying.
Okay, well, let's establish a couple of things here. She's in her 20s. She's phenomenally popular around the world, as we've already said, the most popular Francophone artist. Yes. She is French. Her parents are Malian, and she arrived in Paris as a small child, right? So
absolutely.
What is it about her that is pissing off the right wing so much?
So I think it's the combination of different things. The main thing is that she's black. On top of that, she's a woman. But it's still a really big symptom of what is happening in our society now in France. So she's black, she's a woman. And also she comes from banlieue, so from the suburbs of Paris. So you really have this kind of a cross references, negative references. Black woman, from a background that is not the wealthiest. And I think for she also, the way that she sings, because she doesn't sing, she sings pop, but with a lot of Afro vibes, it also disturbs everybody.
Exactly, because they've actually attacked the language that she speaks, which, as I understand it, has got quite a lot of slang in, the way any pop star in the UK would perform in America, whatever. But she's being attacked because they think that she's undermining the French language.
A lot of French artists that are really popular, that are really loved amongst this kind of elite artists that actually have this capacity, this ability to play with the French language, which is actually a form of intelligence, and a form of demonstrating that you master the language. So it doesn't make any sense. So that's why it is actually a combination of different things. The language, she speaks in French. I mean, she sings in French. It's also something that you have to say, but she has her own style, her own vocabulary as an artist, as everybody does. And so this is this combination. She speaks a language that some people from the far right extremists said we don't know what language she's singing in, although it was actually clear French. But you also have some English words, some invented words, some slang words, And so on top of that, that was also one of the topic that the attackers mentioned.
Rabi, what has been the effect of this controversy on the political class in France? Because I believe it was Emmanuel Macron who raised the issue first of all. I think he said something about Aya singing an Edith Piaf song at the opening of the Olympic Games and so on. I mean, have Macron's people come out and defended her against the far right? How has this played politically in the country?
So beside the far rights, the vast majority of the other political countries, left and right, actually were defended, sometimes more or less vehemently defended Aya Nakamura. And actually the rumor, because it is a rumor in the end, that she's going to sing Edith Piaf on top of that for the opening ceremony of the Olympics. It actually it wasn't started by Macron, but Emmanuel Macron, but by kind of in my opinion, I would say more or less conservative magazine, L'Express. And they said she might sing at the opening ceremony and sing Edith Piaf. So Macron, right after that, said if she sings, I think it would be a great idea, he says. And some ministers as well. And the cultural minister, Amélie Oudéa-Castéra, said the same thing, that she's really against this racism, this banal and this blatant racism. And that she thinks it would be a wonderful idea for Aya Nakamura to sing for the Olympics, but only because, she's the main listened to Francophone artist in the world, period. So it's not even it's not even about liking her or not liking her. It's purely if you want to be objective and don't want to make anybody mad, about the choice. It's purely maths. It's pure maths. It's just the numbers say she's the most listened to in the whole wide world. So,
And yet I came across a poll, a recent poll in France that said 73% of French people don't think that Aya doesn't represent French music. 63% oppose her headlining at the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I mean, how representative would you say are these of French attitudes today? And they seem to be coming out in the open very, very freely. So there's obviously been some enabling going on.
I completely believe these polls. I would maybe even have thought it would have been more if I may say, if I dare say, it's really something that you feel in the air, and it's been maybe 20 years now. And more, you have the feeling that the tongues are just looser and looser, and people are not ashamed anymore, to just say what they think in the open, if that is what they think. Because also, we are that in this society where media is everywhere, social media is everywhere, so everybody has an opinion about everything, even if they have no idea what they talk about. So those polls might be representative of the society as it is now.
I like Aya's music very much, and I'm an African. I live in Nigeria. I wonder, is it really fair to say, I mean, only you could tell me, whether the only people who oppose Aya, the idea of Aya singing at the Olympics, are racist? Are they all right-wing racists, or are there also people who perhaps think that France is better represented by some of its more classical cultural icons, because I know the French are notoriously fussy about their language, and there's actually an organization for the preservation of classical French and all the rest of it. is everybody who is against this idea a racist?
No, not at all. Well, yes and no, I guess. But what I want to say, so this, what was it you said, Martin? 63%. Those 62% are not necessarily far right extremists. Otherwise we would have had a different governments in place now. Well, let's see what's happened in a few years. Never know. It could be a surprise, which won't be that big of a surprise, I guess. But different topic. But
even I mean, I am a fairly frequent visitor to France. I mean, I wouldn't think a girl, I hear she only became a citizen in 2021, okay? I wouldn't necessarily think that an African who only became a citizen 3 years ago was the, epitomizes or symbolizes what Frenchness is all about. Just because she's popular with French youngsters doesn't necessarily mean that she's the perfect representative for everything that France stands for today and historically. And then I would also like to say, maybe I'm a bit of an old fogey. I'm not a great fan of Afro-pop ghetto slang. And I also wonder, wouldn't it be great if she could sing for Mali instead?
For Mali. But she lives here on her life.
Yeah, but
I mean, she could sing for Mali on top of singing for France.
Yes.
Both.
Yeah, I guess
Why
so.
not?
But I just think that there's a little bit too much interest from Black people in enhancing the European or foreign countries, the white countries, if you like, that they've moved to. And they tend not to do very much for the countries they've left behind.
But she didn't ask to be in the foreign line. This is the thing. She's an artist. And she didn't move to France. Her parents moved to France. She was a baby. So she's, this is her country, her main country. This is a country that shaped her. This is a country that shaped the music that she sings now that makes her so renowned internationally. And this is a country that she grew up in, and we can feel that in her music. Her music maybe would have been different if music at all, there would have been if she grew up in Mali. So she didn't move here and then, 3 years ago, and then was chosen to be the headliner for the opening. But also, I think she does represent French culture and France at all. The Olympics are an international event, and France is international. Like it or not, it is a fact. And also in Paris, and the Olympics are taking place in Paris. I don't think that's some kind of, I don't know even who that would be. A kind of a more classical choice. I have nobody pops in my mind right now.
Well, the sort of names that come to my mind are people like, slimy French people, sorry. People like Sacha Distel and, some of these opera singers and all those sort of like Maurice Chevalier. This is what I think when I think about French singers. These are the sort of old, know?
So I'm really sorry to say that I don't mean to offend anybody, but I don't even know if they'll still leave those people. I really don't mean that as an insult at all, truly. It's a genuine feeling.
Of course, those people are very old.
I haven't heard these names, like
30 years.
In the last.
Yeah.
Why not Aya Nakamura? It is actually, and that's what I said earlier. If you just want to avoid a polemic, and see who are we going to take, and just look at the numbers, she's the most heard in France, worldwide, and so I think actually that would be the fairest choice, to be the most as objective as you can be. And she's not an ambassador. She's
well, I'm the wrong person. I'm the wrong person to have this conversation with.
But I also must say, I grew up in Africa. I grew up in Guinea, in West Africa. So for a long time, I had the same view as how come you also French, Black people in France always want to insist, I'm not, I'm French. What I was always proud to say, and it's just normal for me to say, I'm from Senegal and Guinea, but I'm also French. And I think also, actually my best French asset is my pass, because, I can travel everywhere with that. It's always what I say. And the fact that I speak the language, but this language I also would have learned in Africa, in West Africa. So,
well, you know something? My brother qualified for the Olympics in the United Kingdom. And when my brother qualified to run for the Olympics for the British, my father said he should run for Nigeria. Okay, so I'm the worst person to, to get involved in this discussion.
No, I understand what you say, because I actually agree with you, but I just try to think, to be in the shoes of, her, of those people, those actually French African people who grew up here, and where they don't necessarily have the same link, to their origin country. What does that actually mean? Because they were born here for the majority, to the origin country than France.
Thank you very much indeed, Rabi Yasane.
Thank you for having me.
Now, migration, the movement of people, is an issue that's become weaponized, certainly here in Europe. It's been put forward as a modern-day scourge that threatens to overwhelm stable, prosperous societies in Europe and North America. And of course, the traffic is largely one way, from poor and conflict-ridden communities in the global south to developed countries in the north. The debate has become toxic, as we've just heard in the case of Aya Nakamura. Nick Wescott is Professor of Practice in Diplomacy at SOAS, that's part of the University of London, and he argues that despite the hostility, Africans have moved all over the world and they are indeed making their mark. Nick, thanks for joining us. Did I summarise your argument correctly there?
Yes. There are two ways of looking at this. That is one from recipient countries and one from an African point of view. And I'm trying to change the perspective in which this whole issue is seen, to look at it more from an African point of view. And that point of view illustrates, as you say, that Africans are indeed migrating throughout the world. Now, a large part of the migration is actually within Africa itself. And that is because there are a lot of countries which are under a great deal of strain, whether it's climate change or political instability. And a lot of that is forced movement, people just trying to survive. But beyond that, there is a significant exodus of very qualified, enterprising, ambitious Africans looking for opportunities in the rest of the world. And my point is that this has happened throughout history. And we should get out of the obsession of looking at it as, oh my gosh, this is a terrible problem now. What are we all going to do about it? This is what human history is. It's the story of people moving from one place to another. The whole process of the creation of the British Empire was about settlers moving out from Britain, going to the rest of the world. In that case, there was, if you like, a power and an economic imbalance. So they often went as settlers, colonialists, rulers. But way back before then, many people who were going through, many countries going through population explosion, the people left. Ireland has a massive global diaspora, obviously, particularly in America, but also across Asia, across Europe. And that's because a lot of people left Ireland. They both integrated to where they are, and they retain an Irish identity. And the same is very true of the African diaspora. And we're just hearing about some examples of it. There are people who have moved, they integrate into the societies where they are born, in many cases, or brought up or educated, but they retain links to Africa. My point is that this African diaspora is actually one of the most dynamic elements in the world today, and that African diaspora communities are being very successful in many of the countries they have spread to, and that success to some extent feeds back into Africa, not just in the form of remittances, but in the form of global expression. And what we have just heard underlines the point that in many of the creative industries, particularly in music, it is African tastes and African trends that are increasingly influential amongst young people on many continents. It's not just true of Africa. K-pop conquered the world as well and spread Korean influence much wider. But the point is that Africans here are contributing not just to Africa, but to the whole world. And that has become a really important trend that I think will accelerate and grow in the years ahead.
And Patrick?
Nick, it's been said that Europe is running out of people, and that this whole migration debate in Europe is completely the wrong way up. I mean, as we just heard, I mean, Rabi was explaining some of the toxic memes that are going around France, but France is by no means alone. It's the same in Britain, sadly. It's the same even in Portugal. The far right is rising there. The far right is a factor in Italy and in Spain even, and not to mention Eastern Europe. So how can we change the terms of this debate, do you think, in Europe?
That's a really good question. And it's not just an issue for Europe. As you say, a number of developed countries, including Japan, including now China, have reached a tipping point where their population is beginning to decline, not to grow. And that is creating a problem for sustaining economic growth. This has happened in the past in human history, that countries have resisted the immigration of foreign elements. It happened in Ming Dynasty China. It happens in Tokugawa Japan. They closed themselves off from the outside, and they said, we don't want foreign influences here. And it always ended in disaster. These countries ossified. They became less dynamic. Their economies fell behind. And the isolation sort of concreted the social structure as it was. And in the end, they collapsed. So Europe needs to be aware of this in planning its own future. But you're quite right, it is a very politically toxic issue. And the whole argument in France shows this, the rise of the nationalist, even nativist right across Europe, which will probably be reflected in the European Parliament elections just coming up. It's because people are worried and they fear outsiders. They fear the disruption that it will cause. In the same way as they fear capitalism because they might be thrown out of a job. And nevertheless, sort of experience suggests that you may end up without a job anyway if you refuse to change with the times. So making the case is very challenging because you have these instinctive political positions driven by fear of outsiders, fear of change. And it therefore is right that politically you have to approach it carefully. There do need to be some people who are making the case and saying, hey guys, we can't sustain the National Health Service in the UK without Labour coming in from the outside. And people will then say, yeah, that's all right. I want the NHS to work. So that's fine. You can bring in just for the NHS. And then you say, yes, but our agriculture is also falling behind because we haven't got anybody to pick the crops. That's okay. You can just bring in people to pick the crops. That's all right.
Okay, so I've always liked melting pots. It's nice. Multicultural situations are always nice. You look left, you see Chinese. You look right, you see Senegalese. I like it when lots of cultures blend. But I also understand, and Europe definitely needs people, because their obsession with population control is coming back to bite them. So most families don't have more than 1 or 2 children anyway, European families. But I also understand people who are afraid of change. I also understand people who want their countries to retain an identity they regard as being distinctly their own. I can tell you here in Nigeria that there's racism against Chinese and other people. So, it's not only white people who have this fear of being swamped, who have this fear that their country will be overtaken, that the majority will be overtaken by the incomers. It may not be logical, because it never happens that way, really, does it? To be honest with you, I don't care if half of Nigeria is filled with Ghanaians and other people. And I think South Africans, for example, are very wrong to be so xenophobic. But, as I said, I understand it. And I also think that Black people, especially Africans going all over the world to share their skills and their sweat, should consider the possibility of staying home to fight for their own countries. And, we're giving so much of ourselves to foreign countries. It's not a bad idea to stay home and fight for your own.
And I'm sure that's something you'd agree with, Nick, yes?
Yeah, well, they're very good points. And as you say, xenophobia in South Africa is a major problem. And there was a time, I seem to remember, in the 1970s when hundreds of thousands of Ghanaians were expelled from Nigeria overnight and sent home. So you're quite right. It's not a unique phenomena to Europe or the US, we know, obviously, where, again, immigration is a huge political issue. It is always harder to deal with when times are hard. And part of South Africa's problem is that people feel foreigners are coming in and taking their jobs. It happened in the US as well. It underpinned a large part of Donald Trump's success in the election in 2016, this fear of other people. When times are booming and there's enough money to go around and there are jobs for everyone, that fades away. So actually there is a real political importance to try and get the economies going again, for part of which having the right workforce is necessary. But if you can build an atmosphere of optimism, then the fear of outsiders coming in and stealing jobs or stealing business tends to fade away.
Well, Nick, I'm always telling the sort of loads of Nigerian youngsters, some of them are willing to take on illegal channels to get to Europe. And I say to them, you know what? This country there's no African country that is so bad that you need to enter a leaky boat to wind up in a refugee camp in Lampedusa or in Italy or wherever. There's no African country that's so bad that you have to risk your life going through the Sahara to get to Libya.
I don't know, Donu. I think Eritreans might differ from that point of view.
Well, I don't know, Martine. Honestly, do you know that African girls are being raped? Do you know that African girls are being routinely raped in Libya? I just want to ask Nick, do you believe in any form of control? Or do you think the borders should be thrown open?
I think politically, control is necessary. And there will be more violent reactions if there is no control. And we have seen that in some societies. People will accept if folks are fleeing a catastrophe, a disaster. We've seen the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, people fleeing the catastrophes in a war in Ukraine or a catastrophe in Sudan. People say, yeah, you've got to leave, you've got to live. But this is temporary, until you can go back. I agree with you as well. It's in African countries' interests to hang on to their best, their most enterprising people. But they have to offer the opportunity of making a livelihood.
Thank you, Professor Nick Wescott from SOAS. Now, Patrick, you're in the Ghanaian capital, and they've got elections there at the end of the year. Are they campaigning in earnest yet?
Well, I don't think they're campaigning in earnest. We're told that the vice president, that's Mahamudu Bawumia, is on the road this week. And there's a lot of speculation that he's starting his national campaign, but he is yet to name his running mate. But that's provoked a lot of interest. A lot of people wonder if he's going to get to, the biggest base of the NPP, which is in Ashanti region, and he's going to get to Kumasi, the capital of that region, then name the running mate then. So there's a bit of speculation about that. His opponent, John Mahama, who was the former president for the National Democratic Congress, has already named his running mate, and he's already on the campaign trail, but not terribly energetic. The point about Ghana elections is they go on forever. This election campaign really started sometime late last year. It's certainly a marathon rather than a sprint. So the big issues so far are Dumso, which is South African listeners will know that's the load shedding blackout situation. And the lights have been going off and on, off and on. The other big issue, of course, is the debt situation, which is pretty grim in Ghana. 18 months after the default on the foreign debt, they're still fighting it out with the bondholders. These are the commercial outfits that have lent money to Ghana in the past and have now led by the American Fed, have jacked up the interest rate. So Ghana just is struggling to pay its foreign debts, and that's filtering down to a lot of problems in the economy. So all of that is the kind of backdrop. There's economic hard times. People are very worried about the future. So people think that gives Mahama's crowd a bit of a lead, but it's by no means a done deal. Ghanaian elections have been tremendously close last few years. It's a few percentage points between the two big parties each time.
Right. Now, I told you that Patrick is also known as Wikipedia, didn't I? Thank you for that, Patrick. Now, Donu, now you've done a lot of work on this story, which I find really, really curious. You've done a lot of work on the Bobrisky saga. Briefly, a well-known cross-dresser or transvestite, I'm not sure of the correct term, with thousands of followers online, has been jailed for abuse of the naira.
Well, there's a tradition here called spraying. It originated in the Yoruba Southwest because they are naturally very flamboyant. And it's about throwing money at performers or dancers at social events or concerts. So Aya, for example, if Aya was to sing in Nigeria, they'd probably throw thousands of dollars onto the stage. So for some reason, the Nigerian government, with all the many other things it should be worrying about, including the fact that there have been 11 power cuts where I am in the past hour or whatever, have decided that spraying should be illegal because it boils down to abuse of naira, by which they mean that it's undignified, it's disrespecting the currency to throw it up in the air and, probably dance on it when it drops on the floor. So Bobrisky, who has been a famous cross-dresser for some years, he has 5 million followers, was arrested for spraying at the same party where others were spraying, but he was the only one who was arrested. So there's been an uproar about the fact that it's terribly unfair. And I did a little online poll. I did one on LinkedIn and one on Twitter. And funnily enough, it was complete inversion in the sense that on LinkedIn, 56% of people, Nigerians, said homosexuality should be legal in Nigeria and that people should be free to love who they want to love. And 36% said no, it goes against God and tradition. But funnily enough, on Twitter, it was completely reversed. And so that was quite interesting. Even on LinkedIn, 36% said basically leave him alone. So that's actually progress.
I was going to say, does this represent then an evolution then of Nigerian social attitudes when it comes to LGBQT issues?
I think so, because if you live in Nigeria or visit Nigeria, most people are violently, virulently, strongly opposed to homosexuality or anything like that. So I'm quite surprised to see such a large percentage of people saying it's wrong to discriminate against gay people or cross-dressers or whatever. Bobrisky is a rather frivolous young man or woman or whatever you want to call him. And he or she or they have brought this issue to the fore and may wind up being an unlikely hero, an unlikely change driver.
Absolutely, because the theory goes that he's been arrested, singled out, as you pointed out, and he's been processed absolutely speedily, hasn't he? In a system that is notorious for its slowness and its inefficiencies.
I mean, honestly, it would normally take 3 years. This time it took 3 weeks from arrest to jail. So he's now in jail on a 6-month sentence. Some people are very pleased about it, but a lot of people think it's not very fair, including people who think that homosexuality is a crime against God and the Bible or the Quran.
Very, very interesting.
There's hope for Nigeria when it comes to liberalism and human rights.
And we should keep an eye on Bobrisky, and I think he's appealing, isn't he, from his jail cell in a male prison?
I think he is.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Donu. Now, please get in touch with me because I'm rather curious as to know whether spraying as a practice takes place in any other African country. I only know of it in Nigeria. If any of you listeners can point me to another country that practices the spraying of new currency, please let me know. That's it for this first edition of our second season. Thank you for all your support and your suggestions. We're an independent podcast. We haven't got any ads or sponsorship. So if you like what we're doing, please consider making a donation so we can continue the conversation. You can do that on our website, www.AfricaHere&NOW.com. There, you can also listen to all of our episodes. Listen to Donu again. It's always well worth it. And you can find out a little bit more about us. It's also really important that you subscribe and share, particularly on YouTube, which sets the bar really high. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and whichever platform you use for podcasts. We recorded this on Monday, the 29th of April, 2024. Our producer is Anne Busby. Our original music is by Enric Adam. Anna de Wolf Evans and Charlie Panton put everything together. Our thanks to our guests, Rabi and Nick. From Donu, Patrick and me, thank you for your company.